Welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I'm so happy that you could join us today. Thank you for taking the time, booking the time in your schedule to be here. I'm excited to share with you today about healthy work habits. I think this is a really important topic, and since you're here, I'm going to assume that you think it's an important topic too. We're going to dive into the content in just a minute here. And first I'll just do a little bit of an introduction. And so my name is Genevieve McGinnis. My company is Inspired Change Consulting. And I'm on a mission to transform technical leaders, subject matter experts, into confident and effective people leaders. Oftentimes people are recognized and promoted based on their technical abilities, but they run into some struggles with managing or leading teams. And so oftentimes that leads to stress and procrastination and dealing with issues that need to be addressed, and usually leads to poor outcomes. And so I work with people who generally are very smart, they're intelligent, they want to do the right thing, they're just not quite sure what that is. And so I provide training, coaching, consulting, combined with practical step-by-step tools to bridge that gap. It's work that I love doing, and I feel very privileged to be able to serve in this way. In the time that we have together today, you're going to have the opportunity to reflect on some of the areas in your workplace, your professional life that may be causing you some stress, as well as some really practical tools to improve that or to lessen the impact on you. So let's dive in. All right, so when we think about a habit is something that we do on a regular basis, often unconsciously. They're typically small acts that have relatively little impact in the moment, but the benefit or the drawback of those behaviors are felt over time. And there's a couple of reasons why it can be really difficult to start a new habit. And so the first one is that most of us are wired for instant gratification. We want to see results right away. Skip dessert last night, you expect to be down a pound the next day. And while we know that it doesn't really work that way, we're still wired for that instant gratification. And so that delayed benefit of making those changes prevents us from starting new ones or sticking with them long enough in order to reap the rewards. So that's one reason why it's hard to change a habit. The second reason why it's hard is that most of our behaviors are unconscious. We spend the majority of our day on autopilot. It's our default mode, it's our default state of awareness. And there's tons of benefits to having autopilot. It helps us automate routine tasks. We get to go about our day without having to expend a lot of energy or effort for the things that we do every day. I mean, imagine if each morning when you woke up, you had to figure out, how do I start my day? Most of us go through things pretty systematically or routinely in the morning to start our day. So there's lots of benefits of operating on autopilot. But there's certainly drawbacks that come from that as well. And so when we operate on autopilot, we miss opportunities, we don't see things the way as they really are, we come up with solutions that may not be the best to solve our problems. And we can also become really, really rigid in our, or inflexible in our belief or in our habits and the ways that we do things. So that's the second reason. The first is that, we're wired for instant gratification. And the second reason why it's hard to start a new habit is because we often operate, most of our behaviors are unconscious. And so the average person has around 60,000 thoughts a day, and 90 to 95% of the thoughts that you have today are the exact same thoughts that you had yesterday. So talk about being creatures of habit. So if you want to change a habit, you really start with your thoughts. We have this thinking brain. It's that narrative that runs in your head all day long. And then we also have consciousness. And consciousness is our ability to observe or witness those thoughts. And unless you've made it a regular practice to observe your daily thoughts, most of them are going to be passing by or happening in your mind unchecked, without your awareness. And unfortunately, many of those thoughts that we have are unhelpful. They may not be very kind, and they keep us stuck in unwanted areas. So we need to pay attention to what is that voice saying in our head, and practice eliminating some of those self-defeating talk that we may have. So I love this quote by Stephen Covey, that, sow a thought, reap an action, sow an action, reap a habit, sow a habit, reap a character, and sow a character, reap a destiny. Oftentimes when we want to make a change, we dive right into action. But if we haven't done the work on our mindset, we're very quickly going to fail. If we haven't changed our thoughts patterns, we're going to fail. And failure is also a really good way to stay in our current stuck pattern, because if we try something and it doesn't go well, then we just keep that negative thought going of, well, told you that wouldn't work. You tried it once and look at where it got you. This is just the way that things are. So in order to set a new habit, we've got to start first with our mindset. And I also want to touch on personal accountability as well. And so maybe this is the tough love section of this talk, but no one is responsible for your happiness or well-being but you. And our emotional state is probably one of the only things in our lives that we have control over. I'm sure you've probably heard that, while you may not have control over everything that happens to you in your life, you do have control over how you respond to that. And I believe this to be true, but only if we're operating from a high level of consciousness. If we're operating on autopilot, then we don't even really have a choice, because we're not even aware of what's going on as it's happening. So we need to witness and spend more time paying attention to how we're managing that internal state. So nobody's responsible for our happiness but ourselves. And this is true in all areas of our lives. It applies in our workplace, it applies in our relationships, in our homes, in our health, our finances, all of those different areas. But that can be a pretty tough pill to swallow, because it's often painful to accept things in our life that we don't like. It's easy to blame someone or something or some circumstance for the way that we feel. And in fact, it's like a disillusioned way to self-preservation, right? There's nothing wrong with me, it's them. And any time that we place blame outside of ourselves for our current emotional state, we are becoming a victim. And nobody wants to be a victim, but we all, at some point in our lives, play this role. It's just so easy. When we're a victim, we get to let ourselves off the hook. It feels good in the moment. We get that instant gratification. And we may even get attention or sympathy from others in our lives. So there's another benefit that we get from being a victim. And victim thoughts sound something like this: it's not my fault. Life is hard for me. People take advantage of me. Others have it so easy. I'm powerless to make changes. Any variation of those types of thoughts are strong indicators that we are being a victim. And so if we can pay attention to those thoughts, if we're aware of those thoughts, then we can choose more empowering ones. And this is not an easy process. We become very attached to the stories that we tell ourselves. And the longer we've told a story to ourselves, the longer we've held on to it, the more difficult it is to change. It becomes part of our identity and who we are. It becomes like a security blanket. And for the unconscious mind, familiar equals safety, even if it's harmful for us. So for the unconscious mind, familiar equals safety, even if it's not, even if it's negative for us or not, helping us achieve our goals. And unfortunately, the more we practice being a victim, the more life events and circumstances we're going to attract that victimize us. And I am in no way saying that you are responsible for the bad things that have happened to you in your life, but you are responsible for how you respond to those things. And there's a couple of really great books. Well, there's just lots of great books, but a couple that I want to recommend on this. One is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and a more recent one that has just been published by Edith Edgar called The Gift. Both of these books have been written by Holocaust survivors, which, I think everyone would agree is probably one of the most horrific experiences that someone could have in their lives. And they chose not to be victims. They had horrible experiences, but they were able to, overcome those by getting control of their mind and control of their emotional state. I was listening to a podcast with Edith earlier this week, and she made this really powerful statement of that, when something's happening to you that you don't like, instead of asking yourself, why me? Ask yourself, now what? And that's a really powerful question to ask yourself, because when you're asking why me, you are being a victim and you've given up your power. When you say, now what, you're taking back control of that power and realizing that, you do have abilities and resources to change the circumstances in your life. And then the final point on personal accountability is really just that, this commitment to our well-being is one of the most important habits you can cultivate of all. And it doesn't really matter, what your personal individual way of maintaining that well-being is. It'll be different for everybody, but having that commitment and making that a core part of your life will allow you to be more resilient and deal with difficult life situations as they come up and difficult workplace scenarios. So in the workplace, our workplace continues to evolve. In the past, employees were considered doers. So you would go into work, you would do your assigned task, you wouldn't question authority, and very much home was expected to be separate from work. So you had like a work life and a home life, and they were separate. And then many employers over time started to realize that, hey, you know what? Employees are actually thinkers. These are people with good ideas who can help us to make improvements. They've got valuable insights and they can help us to be more profitable. And then there was a big trend to be, a learning organization and to focus on continuous improvement. And now we see another evolution that's happening in the workplace where, more enlightened employers are realizing that, hey, people they're feelers too. They're doers, they're thinkers, they're also feelers. They are these complex beings that have needs outside of the workplace. And so every employer today wants employee engagement, but in order to get employee engagement, you also have to give. And so there's like some very tangible things that create engagement, like very basic tangible things like making sure that people have the right tools and resources to do their job. But the biggest gains in engagement come from things like, employees having a sense of belonging, of feeling like they are cared for, that they matter, that they have opportunities to grow and develop, and that they are able to utilize their best skills and strengths in the workplace. So there's a lot of drivers that have led to this shift and evolution in the workplace over time. And just a few of them would be things like more women in leadership roles. And so, whether it's, by nurture or nature, women do tend to have higher levels of emotional intelligence and be able to sort of connect those dots a little bit better. So that's changing the way that organizations treat their employees. We have more diverse and inclusive workplaces, so that's also bringing in new ideas, new ways of looking things. There's been this trend that's happened to focus on results as opposed to time in. So in the past, oftentimes commitment and value would be measured by the time you spent in the office. So the person who was the first in, last to leave, didn't take a lunch. And now we're switching more to, managing by results and not time in. So what are you actually accomplishing? And so that's giving people more sort of autonomy and freedom over their jobs. And then, of course, what sort of, allowing a lot of these things to happen as well is technology. And so that's had a huge impact on how we get our work done. And there's all kinds of, benefits that come from technology, but there's some downsides as well. And so there may be new expectations, whether they are perceived or real, that we are always on, that we respond instantly to things, and that it's making it more difficult for people to draw lines between when they are at work and when they are at home. And so a lot of these changes have been slow and incremental. So that's to say, they've happened over time. They haven't been overly disruptive. But nothing forces change like a crisis. So the global pandemic that we are experiencing right now has changed our workplaces seemingly overnight. And a really great example of this would be things like working from home. This is a great example. A year ago, I was having lots of conversations with leaders who were struggling because employees have been asking for work from home arrangements for quite some time. And they were struggling because they didn't know how to meet these requests. They didn't have the policies in place to support it. And they were fearful of, what would happen to productivity and what would happen to the team unity. And then, we had these shelter in place orders, and employees weren't able to go to work. So we had to scramble very quickly to set people up to work from home. And I've had many conversations with people over the last several months about how that has gone. And for the most part, of course, there are growing pains, and of course, there's still new skill sets that we need to learn in order to manage this more effectively. But for the most part, it went pretty well. And a lot of those fears about productivity and team unity were just unfounded. And also, most of those people are also agreeing that, hey, this is here to stay. We will always have some form of this work from home now. So that's another sort of transformational shift that's happened. And I'll also say that the way that employers have treated employees over the last 6 months is going to have lasting impacts. So employers who treated people well, who put their employees first, they're going to reap those benefits. And employers who ignored employees' needs and didn't support their employees during this time, well, they're going to feel that for a long time as well. And that will show up as things like loss in productivity, loss in engagement, higher turnover, and less profitability. So it's an outdated model to think of home and work separately. We really, we've talked about work-life balance, but now it's much more about work-life integration. That's a more holistic way to look at our life. And so we've got our work, we've got our health and well-being, we've got our community, we've got our home and family, and all of these intersect. And if one of these areas comes out of balance, it's going to affect the others. So if you are overly stressed at work, it's going to take you a lot more energy to, spend time with your kids, eat healthy foods, find time to exercise and take care of yourself, have a little fun, show up for your friends and family, and get a good night's sleep. But same as in the workplace. If you are not well or you're dealing with stresses in your home, then that's gonna play into your workplace as well. And progressive employers know that. They understand that when one area of our life suffers, all areas of our life suffer, and they're building programs and policies and designing workplaces that support all of employees' needs. And they have good reason to be, mindful of this integration. Oops, sorry about that. So just a few stats for you here. 47% of Canadians report that work is the most stressful part of their lives. This was a survey that was done by Mental Health Commission of Canada back in 2016. So that's 4 years ago. And I recently saw one from Mercer that said that of the people that they had surveyed, Canadians were reporting that they feel like they are more stressed now in their workplaces than they were 5 years ago. So we don't see that number going down, we see that number going up. Mental health costs Canadian employers $50 billion annually in lost productivity. That's a huge number. That's from the Conference Board of Canada. And stress certainly contributes to our overall well-being. Potentially up to 90% of illness and disease can be related back to stress that we have in our lives. So we can't solve problems or make improvements until we're fully aware of what that problem is. The handout that you received a couple of days ago was an exercise to go through to really check in and get clear on where you can celebrate what's going well in your professional life and where are areas that you may want to make some improvements. And so we're going to walk through that activity now. If you have it next to you, you can read through. Otherwise, it's okay. We're going to walk through it, and so you can make some notes, or you can just sort of like mentally keep this in your head. And so the first area that we're going to look at is work design. And so work design is all about things like, what does your workload look like? Do you have too much to do, too little? Do you like the work that you're doing? Is it things that you are passionate about, that you are interested in? Is the timelines and the deadlines reasonable to get that work done? Do you have some autonomy over the ability to make decisions that impact your work? And are you really interested and connected in the work that you're doing? So that's all work design. So you can go ahead, take a second, and think on a scale from 1 to 10, how happy would you say you are right now with your overall work design? And so a 1 would be dissatisfied, and the top end of the scale, the highest 10 would be like super satisfied. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you with your work design? And the next thing I want you to think about is, how important is that to you? How happy would you like to be with your work design? And so for some, they may find that a little redundant, but for other people, you're going to put different weights on these different categories. And so all might be a 10, or some may be less important than others. The other thing that I should mention as well is that as we're going through all of these categories, your responses are totally subjective. So there is no right or wrong. It's personal. It's how you see things. So for example, you couldn't go to one of your coworkers afterwards and maybe compare, your culture score. And maybe they've scored culture a 7 and you've scored it a 3. You're both right. So don't try to systemize it. Don't try to overanalyze it. It really is all about your experience. And a lot of these categories too can sort of overlap and are intertwined with each other as well. That's also okay. The purpose of this is to help you glean some clarity on what's going well and where you would like to see some improvements. So we've covered work design. Next, we're going to go on to your role in your organization. And so your role in your organization is all about, what level are you at? Do you feel like you have enough like responsibility and authority? Are you clear on what your job expectations are? Sometimes we end up in situations where we have conflicting priorities, or we're reporting to different people and they're asking us to do different things, so that can cause some stress. Or we also could be in a situation where we are doing too many roles. I have one manager that I've been working with for a while, and he was his company's lead design engineer. And then he took on the role to manage the engineering department. But all of the work that he had as the lead design engineer didn't go away. And so now he's got to manage the team as well. And so that was 4 years ago. Over those 4 years, the company has grown, the team has grown, and he's often struggling to keep up with all of those demands. And because he's not jumping up and down like the house is on fire, the organization allows it to continue. And everybody's aware that he's got too much on his plate, but when things aren't going well, I mean, it still comes back to him, right? And oftentimes what happens in that situation, it's, you gravitate towards the things that you are the most interested in, that you're the most comfortable in, and then the other things start to slip. So how comfortable are you with your role in the organization? Scale of 1 to 10. And then what would you like it to be? Next, we'll look at culture. And so here, this is about, culture is really interesting because culture can sometimes be hard to put our finger on, but I always describe a culture as the culture of your organization is like what you would tell a close friend about what it's like to work in your business. So it's not the values that the company puts on the boardroom, on a poster in a boardroom, although it could be. It's about what actually happens in day-to-day interactions. How do people treat each other? What does it feel like to be an employee? Are you, is there appropriate rewards and recognition? Do you get to participate in decision-making? Are you a part of those conversations? Do you get to give feedback? Is your feedback heard? Is there a way to sort of, implement the ideas that you have? Is there good communication and information flow? Do you think it's fair? All of those things come into the workplace culture. So that's like, what does it feel like to work in your organization? So on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you with that? And then next, how happy do you want to be? We have career development. And so this is a huge, huge part of engagement today. And oftentimes, we might look at engagement as, like climbing to the next step, moving up the ladder. But organizations are becoming more and more lean, more and more flat. There's typically less opportunity to move into those roles. So we really should look at career development as more like a lattice. So are we, a lattice as opposed to a ladder, are we increasing our skill set? Are we getting transferable skills? Are we having opportunities to continue to learn and grow? So is someone in your company having that conversation with you? Is there a plan? Is there a budget? Those are all things to consider around your career development. So how happy are you with it currently, and how happy do you want to be? Then we have relationships. And so this is about, how we get along with others. Do we have a good relationship with our manager, our coworkers, contractors, suppliers, those sorts of things, our clients? And what's it like to be on the team? Because sometimes, we might have good relationships with others, but there is conflict amongst the team. There are other people who don't get along, and that affects us as well. So a sign of like a high performing team, first of all, you're going to have a lot of trust. And second of all, people are able to speak their minds. They are able to say what they think, when they think it, have opposing opinions, argue, debate, disagree, but they do that in a way that still like maintains the relationship and keeps things intact. A sign of low trust and low performing teams is that things get communicated or meetings are had, and then people start having side conversations. There's a back channel. There's another way in which the actual work gets done. So what are the relationships like? How does conflict get dealt with? In my experience, a lot of organizations don't deal with conflict very well. They would rather ignore it. They'd rather hope that it goes away, which very rarely happens. It's just allowed to fester and build. So is conflict dealt with in a timely manner? And then at a very basic level as well, like how do people treat each other? Is it an environment that has respectful behavior, or is it an environment where people are treated poorly or harassed or discriminated against? So that's relationships. How comfortable are you? How happy are you with the relationships in your workplace, and how happy do you want to be? And then finally, we have working conditions. And this is really about how comfortable are you in your workplace? And that's like the workspace that you go into. And so is it neat, clean, organized? Do those things matter to you? Is it comfortable? Are you exposed to like excessive like noise or smells, heat, those sorts of things? And then also within working conditions, we would look at things like do you feel safe? And a good example for that would be with COVID-19. Do you feel like your employer is taking those appropriate safety protocols? So on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you with working conditions? And then, how happy do you want to be? So I'm just going to pause here for a second. This is where, even just very quickly going through that, listening to me talk about those things, you've probably had a few things pop up. And so this should help you realize or understand or see where are the areas that maybe you need to dig a little deeper into. And I really suggest that you take some time after this session to reflect on that. Get really clear on what the areas are and why they matter to you. And I recommend that you do this not in your head. So think about it, but then take it the next step and either talk to somebody about it that you trust, or write it down. And so both of those things are helpful because when we speak 4 times slower than we think. So we think 4 times faster than we speak. And so just by that act of talking it out helps to slow things down. I'm sure you've experienced that times when, things are just kind of spinning and spinning and spinning in your head. And then you go to say it to somebody and you're like, oh, that's it. How did that come out in 4 sentences? I just thought about it for 45 minutes. So that's one. And then also writing is another one to do that. And so while speaking slows down our thought process, writing slows it down even more. And when we write, it's really hard to write unconsciously. Just that effort of pen to paper causes us to slow down. So don't filter yourself when you're writing, and you might be surprised at what comes up. All right. So now we know sort of what our areas to work on are. Now what? Well, there's really 3 main ways to deal with stress, and they either are to reduce your exposure, cope with the stress, or eliminate the stress. And so the strategy that you're going to use, whether you decide to reduce your exposure, to cope, or to eliminate, is going to depend on the situation. And the 2 areas that we're going to focus on today are how to eliminate stress by setting boundaries, and how to cope with stress. And one of the best ways to cope with stress is to practice good self-care habits. And when we look at self-care, you may have heard that phrase that you can't pour from an empty cup, meaning if we don't take care of ourselves and fill our cup first, we don't have anything to give to others. Self-care helps us keep our cup full. And most of us want to, take good care of our families, be successful, have lots of energy, and feel great. And so if we can give ourselves this gift of a consistent self-care routine, that's really the key to achieving all of those things. So self-care is not frivolous. It's not just spa days and bubble baths, although those are wonderful and they do count. In reality, self-care includes any activity that we do to take care of our emotional, psychological, physical, and spiritual well-being. So when we have all of these areas shored up, stress has much less of an impact on us. And if you feel like your cup is empty right now or down to its last few drops, I feel you. I hear you. It's been a really rough 6 months. And oftentimes, there's kind of like our cup can empty in sort of a one-time traumatic event that happens that completely rocks our world. That can happen. But more often than not, what happens is it's sort of like this slow, steady leak. And it often, our cup gets lower and lower and lower without us really realizing it until we've kind of dug ourselves into a hole. And for a lot of people, the pandemic was a tipping point. So we're going to go through some examples of what are some things that you can do to increase your self-care. Some of these, will just be reminders for you of things that you've enjoyed before in the past, but maybe you haven't been participating in, and maybe it'll generate some new ideas as well. So the first area that we'll look at is our emotional well-being. And so here we should be focused on things like relaxation. So these could be activities like yoga or Tai Chi or deep breathing exercises, things that help us to relax. They could also be activities, hobbies that we lose ourselves in that calm us and bring us joy. Then another area for emotional well-being is our connection with others. And so humans are social beings. We need to be around other people. We need to be able to connect with others. But, we really have to focus here more on quality versus quantity. So it's not about, I should do that, or I should spend time with this person. We want to spend time with people who fill us up and who make us feel good. And our society and technology is kind of built in a way now that is keeping us more separate. We're living in more, like single family homes, and, you don't have to leave your house these days to have anything delivered. You can have anything delivered, so you don't have to go shopping, you don't have to go out in public, and we've become very individualistic. And I think back to my times where I used to do a lot of travel and I used to go different places and spend a lot of time in Central America. And one thing that I would notice there is that, I would go to these communities and spend time with people who really didn't have a whole lot, but they all seem to be very happy. And I'm convinced that one of the reasons for that is because they have such strong connection to other people, and they don't live these sort of separate individual lives. So focus on connection. Spend time in nature. That can be anything like, going for a walk, go to the beach, enjoy the sunset. There is real power and energy in spending time in nature. So do that to fill yourself up. And then, of course, practice gratitude. Take a regular inventory of like what's going well. We often focus so much on what we lack, when really, there's lots of great things that we can focus on as well. And when we focus on the good, we get more good. Maybe you've seen that Atlantic Canada has been named as one of the safest places to be during this pandemic. And I don't know if that's technically true or not, but I know personally for myself, I am very, very grateful to live where I live at this time. And so when some of those other things around the pandemic pop up for me, that's one of my groundings is like, yeah, but you know what? Like, it could be a lot worse than it is. And here's what we have to be grateful for. And then we have our psychological well-being. And so first on this list is laughter. Laughter is medicine, and it is a powerful painkiller. There's even such a thing as laughter therapy. Maybe you've heard of that, where people get around together in a group and they will practice various laughs. And of course, at the beginning, it's forced and it's fake, but your body doesn't know the difference. It doesn't know the difference between whether, you're really feeling happy or you're just you create the same chemicals and emotional response. So try to laugh some more. And it's interesting because children get this, toddlers get this. Some research will say that kids laugh like a couple hundred times a day, toddlers, and then by the time we become adults, we're like more to the 15, 20 times a day. And so I don't know if those numbers are 100% accurate, but I do know that, anecdotally, my daughter just turned 5. And when she was in that age from like, 2-ish to around now, she just started school. So, real world starting to hit her, but she would laugh all the time. Everything was funny. And, that was always her goal, was to like make people laugh and see the joy in things. And so kids get that. And then as adults, we kind of become more reserved over time. So try to laugh more, bring some fun and humor into your workplaces. When we do that, when we can laugh more, our stress goes down and creativity opens up and new ideas come in. And sometimes people will push back a bit and say, oh, my workplace doesn't allow for that, or what we do is too serious to have fun. And I really don't buy that. I think that there's a time and a place. There is appropriate and inappropriate behavior, but the more stressful your work environment is, the more you need to have fun. And just think about, all the videos that have been online of healthcare workers who over the last few months have been doing like videos, dances, and lip syncs, and all of that is like to relieve stress and pressure. Journaling is another great one. You get the most benefit from journaling if you do it on a regular basis, but that can be good. Pay attention to social media, limit your time there. I don't know if anybody has seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix. It's still on my list. I haven't got there yet, but that has gotten some really great reviews. So pay attention to the time that you're spending there, and also what you're feeding your mind with. And so what media are you consuming? What books are you reading? What TV shows are you watching? All of those things impact us psychologically. And then make sure that you set clear boundaries and that you follow through on those. You honor your own boundaries, and more on that on our next slide. Then we've got our physical well-being. And so we should, exercise is a really great way to boost our overall well-being. Try to do that in the morning. Start your day with some activity. Doesn't have to be a lot. 10 or 15 minutes can be, have huge impacts. And then, we can bring more exercise into our workplace as well. So try to, stand more, sit less. Walking meetings were popular before the pandemic, but they're even more so now, so that, people can get outside. They have more opportunity to social distance. I was speaking with a consultant in Ontario earlier this week, and he said he did a full day training session outside, socially distanced with a group that didn't want to wait. And, so we're getting creative on like how we can do business, but stay active and get outside. Limit your caffeine, alcohol, and sugar. And so, that's always good advice, but definitely I think it's a good time to check in as well and see, have you modified any of your behaviors? Have you added in any bad behaviors as a result of the pandemic? And so I remember seeing lots of memes of like, the coffee hands off to the wine. And so are we consuming more alcohol, more caffeine, foods that aren't good for us? I know for myself, I started eating chips like every day. I don't even really like chips, but now they are part of my my daily diet. So take some stock there. Is there something that, maybe you've added in that you want to take back out? And then definitely we've got to make sure that we have good sleep hygiene practices and that we're getting proper rest. And then finally on this list, we have our spiritual well-being. And here we're looking at things like volunteering, acts of kindness. These are things that meet our need for contribution, which is a higher need. And then also we have meditation. And so mindfulness is a learnable skill, and it is the best way to become more mindful and operate less on autopilot is to meditate. And so meditation helps us to train the mind to become more aware and to stay in the present moment. This is, backed by thousands of scientific studies. Neuroscientists now view meditation as the most powerful top way to change your brain. And so when we have a regular practice, it can transform our lives. We become more aware of our inner world, and when we become more aware of our inner world, we get more control of it, and then we have the opportunity to reprogram our dominant thoughts. And so I highly encourage you to try this. You may be amazed at how many of the thoughts you habitually think that are actually driving you away from what you really want. And with daily practice, you can imprint the right programming. It was once believed that the brain was fixed, and we now know that's not true. And there's this thing that's called neuroplasticity. Our brains are neuroplastic. And so cells that wire together, fire together, meaning that, the more we think a certain way, the stronger those neural networks bond together. And by meditation, we can create new neural networks. So in as little as 3 months, 10 minutes a day, if you did a brain scan today and a brain scan at the end of that 3 months of that daily 10-minute practice, your brain will look different. And what happens is areas like the amygdala that triggers stress and fear and anxiety, those neural networks, as well as the ones that run what's called the default mode network, that can loosely be described as the ego, those neural networks shrink. And the neural networks that are responsible for our emotions and our creativity, they actually get stronger. So really, there's only two things you need to start a meditation practice. The first is motivation. You have to want to do it. You have to want to improve your life by changing your brain. And then secondly, you need to have a regular practice. And so ideally that's daily, 10 minutes a day or longer, start there. And those are the only two things you need. There's tons of apps out there like Headspace or Calm, and tons of online tools, lots of free resources in order to get started. And if you do take this up, if you do start meditation and it works for you, it helps you, please let me know. I love hearing these success stories. So there's lots of strategies here to cope with stress. If you feel overwhelmed or that, oh my goodness, I'm just lacking in a lot of different areas here, don't despair, don't beat yourself up for that. Just acknowledge that's where you are and pick one. Pick the one that's the easiest for you, that you're drawn to, that you're interested in, and that is going to, give you some joy. Start there. And then once that's established, start building from there and adding in other things. But if you're really stuck and you can't even get, can't take that first step, well, then you've got to ask for help. And that might be reaching out to a good friend that you can talk to. It could be going through your EAP program or seeking some kind of other professional advice, because no one has to suffer and everybody deserves to be happy. So next we're going to talk about setting boundaries. So this is a way to eliminate stress from your life. And the truth is that people that set boundaries gain respect. And having boundaries is assertive behavior. It helps us protect our rights without stepping on other people's rights. It protects us from becoming a victim, and it allows us to live a life that makes us happy. And even though we might have some fear or guilt around setting boundaries in particular areas, people like other people that set boundaries because then they know where they stand with them. And when you stand with someone, you can be yourself and you can, fully sort of trust the relationship. It's always easier to set boundaries at the beginning of a relationship. And so the more ingrained the pattern is, the more difficult it's going to be to set that boundary. But it's certainly not a reason to, not to start it. Just know it's going to take more work. So it's always easier at the beginning of the relationship. And also the power comes into here as well too. And so if the more power you have in the relationship, the easier it is to set a boundary. So for example, it might be easier to set a boundary with someone who reports into you than it is to set a boundary with someone who manages you. All right, so the first step in setting a boundary is to know your values, not your value, know your values. This is letting you know what you're willing to accept, what you're not willing to accept, and getting really clear on the why. Okay, you need to know why that's important to you. So maybe you know that you're working too many hours and you've got too much on your plate, and your manager consistently comes to you when there's something new to be done and you don't say no. Okay, so that's the issue. But now you got to get into like, why is that a problem? Is it a problem because it's taking away from your family time, and family is a very strong value for you? Or maybe it's taking away from something, another life goal that you have or hobby that you have. So that's your why. So you got to get clear on that, because that will help you understand why you need to set this boundary. Another indicator that you need to set a boundary, if you don't have that sort of insight up front, is paying attention to how you're feeling. If, times where we get like angry, upset, frustrated, we feel like a victim, those are all warning signs. Those are all sort of, something that's trying to get our attention to say a boundary's been crossed here. Once you know that boundary's been crossed and you want to do something about it, then the next step is to communicate that. And when you communicate, there's a few things here. One is that you don't necessarily want to make it all about you. So taking that example of working too many hours, if you were to go to your manager and say, I'm stressed out, I've got too much on my plate, well, that's really all about you. So it's better to present the information in a way that shows, well, how does this impact them? And so if you're being stressed out and have too much to do, the impact on them could be things like, projects are going to slip, quality is going to be a problem, customers are not going to be happy. Those are things that, now there's an impact for the manager, and that's a good way to present these information when we're trying to get a boundary. So it's not all about us, it's also about how does this protect them. Everybody wants to know how this is relevant for me. The other thing is that when you are communicating is to do it with some structure. And so boundaries on the fly typically never work. So when it's in the moment, it's usually emotionally charged, people are defensive, they kind of dig in. And when we create some structure around setting a boundary, for example, having a meeting to discuss it, then that elevates the importance, and it lets, for the other person as well, that, hey, this is a real thing. You need to respect your own boundaries, and while that may seem obvious, and do a lot of coaching with people around improving workplace scenarios, and often we're our own worst enemy. So let's say you've set a boundary that, expense forms have to be in by 10 o'clock on Tuesday or they won't make the next payroll. And you've communicated that, everybody understands the reasons why, and then if they come in late, they're not going to get processed until next payroll. And then somebody submits one at noon and you process it. You very clearly told them that, you don't respect your own boundaries, so they don't have to either. And then finally, with setting boundaries, we want to make sure that we have a really strong plan for when those boundaries get crossed, because inevitably they will be. We're trying to train people into new behavioral patterns, and so it's just natural, it will happen. So one thing to do is, have that plan. What are you going to do? Visualize your boundary getting crossed, and then how you're going to respond to that. It will help you be more conscious in the moment. You won't, have a knee-jerk reaction. And so make sure that you do that. And also, when your boundary has been crossed, and one of your responses is going to be to bring that up. You're going to have to let the other person know. Make sure that you do that in a very timely manner. It's not uncommon to be, have some emotional reaction to it. We might stew over it. We might process. We might debate. Do I bring it up? Do I not bring it up? And so, obviously you don't want to do it at a time when you can't speak calmly and rationally. But if you wait a week or a month, by the time you go to have that conversation, the impact is going to be a lot less. So again, people like immediate consequences. That's true of all feedback that we give. The longer we wait to deliver the message, the less impact it has. So make sure you do it on in a timely way. And when we don't bring things up as they happen, we are sending a strong message that we're condoning the behavior and that it's okay for people to treat us that way. So, don't be too hard on yourself, I guess would be my last piece of advice, that, view violations as a learning experience, and know that it's probably going to have to be communicated several times. That's just the way this process works, and celebrate those little wins along the way. So I see that we are getting quite close to our time. So I do have a couple more slides, but I would like to open it up and just see if there are any questions or comments that people would like to make. So I can see there's some typing. I'll give you, some time to get those in there. If the slides are available, yeah, I don't mind sharing those. So you can certainly have those. Beth can send them out. All right. So if no other questions pop up, I'm going to keep going through with the time that we have. These are some, these are some things that I think are the leader's responsibility, and leaders certainly have a huge role to play in engagement and creating a positive work experience. And so the first is to be a healthy role model. And so by that, I mean, we've got to share about ourselves. We've got to share our challenges. We've got to share the things that are going well in our lives, and also the things that are not. So, to kind of step away from that model of work is work and home is home, and let people know that you're a person too. So lead by example. When you open up, you give other people permission. You want to build relationships with people and show them that you care. The best leaders already knew what individual employees needed during the pandemic because they had relationships with them. They knew what was going to be their pain points. They knew what some possible issues would be coming up. And so, we don't have to know all the nitty-gritty details about people's personal lives, but there's a baseline. We should know, are they in a relationship? Where do they live? Do they have kids, pets? What are their hobbies, their interests, their stressors, their life event things that are going on? As a good leader, you should be aware of those things. And then one of the best ways to become aware is to make these time for meaningful one-on-one conversations. And that goes much deeper than just saying, hey, how's it going? It's about really sitting down, giving them your undivided attention, listening to what they have to say. It's funny because there's tons of resistance around, annual performance reviews. But when I ask people what they like about performance reviews, the number one response I get is that one-on-one quality time with their manager. So people want their leaders' time. And you can make opportunities for that outside of that review process. And sometimes those things will bring up some resistance or fear from leaders. They worry about, well, if I put myself out there, what are people going to think about me? They're going to think I'm weak. And really, vulnerability is a sign of leadership strength, not weakness. Another fear might be that employees are going to suck my time and want to spend a lot of time talking about their personal issues, which could happen, but it's usually in an isolated, case-by-case basis, and you manage that with having good boundaries. And then the third fear that sometimes comes up with this is that people are going to put things out there that are too tough, too difficult, things that you just don't think that you have the skills to deal with. So it could be something like addiction or divorce or, serious illness, those sorts of things. And your job is not to be a counselor, a hero. You don't have to fix people's problems. You just have to be there to listen and to be empathetic and to, give them appropriate resources when required. So I'm gonna wrap up here because we're at our time. I hope you enjoyed today, found value out of that. I would love to hear from you. So please connect with me. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can send me an email. I do have some upcoming training on for technical leaders to become confident and efficient people leaders. So if that's something that might interest you, you can reach out to me for that. or if you just want to further this conversation of, of anything that we covered in today's session. So thank you very much. I really appreciate all of your time today, and I hope you have a great afternoon.